a man who has been on this show several times. Norm Finkelstein is, and this is a good thing, even though it's bad for us, it's a good thing for the world. That man is getting much harder to book. He will be back on before too long, but he is getting much harder to book. The last time I talked to him, I was like, "Oh, could we do this?" And he's like, "No, but I'm going to be on Chris Cuomo." So he has been all over the place lately, and in particular, recently he was on Piers Morgan, and I want to show just a little bit of that interview. Let me just pull up.
See it in my mind's eye. I saw your eyes narrow. Cool. That famous moment when Susan Boyle appeared on Britain's Got Talent. And I remember the camera turning to you, focusing on you. I could see it in my mind's eye. I saw your eyes narrow. And suddenly the humanity in you came up. Here is this obscure woman whose talent had gone unrecognized. And if I can speak to that same program, for me, the most poignant moment, the one I carry with me since that moment, was when Simon Cowell asked Susan Boyle, "Well, why haven't you been discovered yet?" And she replied, "Because I haven't been given a chance." And that's how I feel about the people of Gaza. That's how I feel about those young men in Gaza. You ask me why I won't condemn them. Because those young men were born into a concentration camp. They were born into among the most dense populated places on God's earth. Half of the population of Gaza is children. 70% are refugees who were expelled from Israel in 1948 and their descendants. 70% of Gaza's youth have no jobs, no future, no nothing. They are Susan Boyle times 10,000, never given a chance. And as things looked the night before October 7th, when the question of Gaza was disappearing from the public stage, I will admit to you, Piers, I myself had given up on Gaza. In 2020, I decided it's hopeless, it's pointless, I only have a finite number of years left in my life, and it's time for me to move on. And I'll tell you, that was a wrenching decision on my part, because I knew I was abandoning the people who for 15 years I had devoted my life to chronicling every detail of the horror that had been inflicted on those people. And I gave up on them.
Okay.
And that meant if I gave up, they had no future, because I was the last chronicler.
Okay, but what I would say,
Gaza.
All right, but what
I have the only book
but Professor,
that's been written on this subject.
Let me respond. I would respond by saying that what people in Israel would say, and what Jewish people would say, particularly who live in Israel, is that they were facing a constant barrage of rockets from Hamas. That Hamas won political power in 2005-6. That they were given a huge amount of money and could have done whatever they wanted with that money, but chose to pursue a path of effectively terrorizing the Israelis over that period. And the Israelis, you're right, they responded they have a far superior military, and they responded in the way that they did. And this cycle has been going on in repeat and repeat and repeat. But where you and I differ about this is that I think what happened on October the 7th was just on a different scale to anything we've seen, and the way it was carried out. And I just don't think saying that people who have been oppressed, which they undoubtedly were for many years, that justifies them committing that act of terror. But let's take a break. Let's come back after the break. Welcome back. I'm still with Professor Norm Finkelstein. Professor, just to round off what we've just been discussing, given that you wrote that Substack and you want me to believe, and okay, I'll take your word for it, that you were completely oblivious to the reality of what had happened here and the scale of it. But given you're not now oblivious to that, why have you not removed that Substack, given the language is so clearly offensive to people, and you based it, by your own words, on a false premise about what had happened?
You know, Piers, that's a very good question. And this morning, when I was talking to some friends from the UK, I was warned you would ask that question. I'll honestly tell you, I never fear the truth. I don't. I feel the truth is a very powerful weapon on the side of the oppressed. I never fear it. Now, I'm going to give you the answer. Again, you can or can't disagree with me or believe me. I was tempted to remove it. I was tempted to, quote unquote, protect myself. I didn't remove it because I thought that's intellectually dishonest. I wrote that statement. It's part of the historical record. It's part of the documentary record. And I shouldn't do what Stalin used to do. So when he published photographs of the Bolshevik Revolution, he would take Trotsky's picture out.
Okay, but
and that's the image.
So you won't delete it.
So that's the image that stuck to me.
All right, you haven't got to delete it, but do you regret it?
Do I regret what?
Do you regret the contents of that Substack, given that you now know what really happened?
Yes, if it can be misconstrued to mean that I wrote that with full knowledge of what happened, of course I regret it.
Okay.
However, it remains part of the record. And as a serious scholar, I'm not a great scholar. I'm not in the ranks of the great British historians, but I take scholarship seriously. I did not want to denature, to falsify, to misrepresent the documentary record.
But let me ask you, Professor. All right, let me ask you.
And I will leave it there.
Okay, that's fair. Listen, that's your decision. You are the son of two people who survived the Holocaust, who were both in concentration camps. You're a Jewish man, and you know how incendiary that Substack has proven to be with Jewish people around the world, many of whom have felt this is the nearest thing to the Holocaust of World War II that they've endured. What your parents went through, being revisited on them in these kibbutzes on October the 7th. What do you feel about them? I mean, how would your parents have felt about you literally on the day that this happened, talking about heroic resistance, talking about that you will never begrudge the scenes, that the stars in heaven are looking kindly down, glory, glory, the souls of Gaza go marching on. How would your parents have felt about that, coming out of concentration camps, surviving the Holocaust of World War II?
Well, first of all, anything I write, I have my parents looking at the screen behind me over my shoulders, in a metaphorical sense. I am very conscious every moment of my existence. Every moment of my existence goes back to the martyrdom of my family. So it's not as if suddenly you're posing a question to me that never occurred to me. Quite the contrary, I do need, even 30 years after their death, I need the moral validation that came from my parents' martyrdom and the extermination of their family. How would my parents have reacted? My guess is if on the first day they heard that inmates in a concentration camp burst its gates, I think my parents would be very pleased at that fact. As the events became clearer, my guess, but this is pure speculation, my guess is my parents would go out with their hearts, would go out to those who burst the gates of the concentration camp and whose lives were destroyed. Now, you will say to me, completely legitimately, you would say, well, what would your parents feel about the innocents who were slaughtered in the atrocities on that date? So I'm going to give you as close an answer as I could give, as I'm able to. I once asked my late mother, I said to her, what was your feeling when you heard that the German cities were being terror bombed during World War II? The carpet bombing of the German cities targeting civilians. What was your feeling? And my mother's response to me was, quote, our feeling was, if we're going to die, we're going to take some of them with us. Now, that's not the most morally elevated statement. I agree. And do I wish my mother had and my father had a heightened sensitivity to German civilian life? I suppose I would wish it. But I will tell you, Piers, to the last day of my parents' life, it was unthinkable that they would have a kind word to say about Germans. And it was unthinkable that I would ever quarrel with them on that point.
Okay.
All right. So obviously the Susan Boyle analogy is
amazing.
Is
This is what you were gonna say.
Truly, yes.
Is Norm and his normiest. That's nobody else would have reached for that in that moment.
I actually what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say my speed analogy last week. It just pales in comparison to what he did.
Yeah, I was gonna say I actually ghost wrote that for Norm. Norm hit me up after he was on the show and said, "Can you write some of my one liner?" No, sorry, yeah.
You punched up Norm's.
Yeah. He had no mentions of America's Got
Talent. He's never actually seen that program, so you know.
And like, Jake's iPad is just like his little earbuds are just filled with Susan Boyle tunes.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, that aside.
That aside, I really liked. All right, I just wanted to get a different pause point than what we had there with his mouth open, but yeah, right. Like what I like about this, and this is a couple things, right? So I did actually have strong disagreements with that initial Substack post they're talking about. You can watch when Matthew Whalen and I were breaking down Norm's debate with Eli Lake. We had a whole back and forth, kind of, rolled in the deep a little about this, and we actually clipped that breaking down Norman Finkelstein's position on Hamas. So you want to sort of get the long version of what I think about this and the disagreements that I did have with Norm about that at the time. That's where it is. But also on display here are so many of the things that I appreciate about this guy, that he is just genuinely not somebody who was made by or for social media. He's not spending his time thinking about how people are going to perceive things, or how like how to sort of like win some kind of rhetorical game. This is a guy who does an excruciating amount of homework about everything that he talks about, and who, is genuinely trying to figure shit out. And the fact that he would have that sense of intellectual integrity, that it's like, no, I'm not gonna like delete something because I'm embarrassed by it now, right? That's it's like look, I'm not, I said what I said, and and if I was wrong about some of this, I'm gonna have to live with it. I actually admire that. And then at the end, all Susan Boyle levity aside, this sort of note that he ends on is actually like, look, a lesser man would have been like, fuck you, why are you talking about my parents? You didn't know them, right? And frankly, would have had a point. If he had said that, I suppose I just sacrificed my future Piers Morgan appearances, but so be it. But in any case, but he doesn't do that. Like, he actually takes the question seriously and like wrestles with it in his mind, and it's like, well, here's a really thoughtful, in-depth answer, and like, let's not just like do some sort of rhetorical game in either direction, where the fact that these people experience these horrors, that there were Holocaust survivors, is used in some simple way to validate anything one way or the other. But it's like, look, these were my parents. I talk to them about this stuff all the time. I know the good and bad of what they thought, and that can actually help me think more empathetically towards other people who have who've gone, not through the same thing, but through awful experiences of their own, and what the limits of their moral imaginations might be. And I actually really admire that answer, that he can see how the way that after what his parents went through, that might have given them trouble sort of fully appreciating the humanity of German civilians, that he can understand how, other people who have been victimized in different ways, can have trouble understanding, appreciating the full humanity of Israeli civilians. You don't have to endorse that to like imaginatively understand that about people's experience. And ultimately, whatever you think about this stuff, and like, I obviously on the show we did on 10/9, right, I strongly condemned people on the left who I thought were sort of frivolously not taking the sort of principle of attacks on civilians are never justified as seriously as they should in this case. But whatever you think about the substance of this, that is just a morally serious answer in a way that makes me think that, I hope I can call Norm my friend. He's not without his eccentricities, but he is, this is a person who thinks about this stuff seriously in a way that, frankly, media creatures like Piers Morgan just not only don't, but can't imagine doing.
Yeah, I think I think that this clip, and I guess we'll wrap up in a sec, but yeah, I think it shows why Norm is worth listening to, even if you don't agree with him, because it's a deeply human and well thought out answer. I don't agree with him on
Sure.
this issue. I mean, I think it's quite easy to, if you make it about whether you're condemning a human being versus condemning an action, I hope that only in the most extreme circumstances are we condemning an entire human being anyway. I think, you can, like, I just think that's not a very difficult distinction to make, where obviously there's certain people who, if they do something that we find morally objectionable, if we look at all of the things that led to that action, we can understand it a lot better, right? But I think that that type of thinking is in some ways how we get into this like cyclical violence, right? If my atrocity is justified and yours isn't. But that said, I it still made me think, his answer, talking about how his parents, how would have thought about the Germans, and it made me think about, what are the comparisons between, what Jews went through, what Palestinians are going through, how are they apt, how are they not apt? But it was, like you said, it wasn't just like a Ben Shapiro, like, how am I going to think of the best way to shut you down? Like he actually really took it seriously, and he gave a really
exactly
answer. But
and look, I agree with you, right? I think the distinction you're making is exactly the right one. I mean, this is what I was pushing in the discussion with Matthew Whalen, right? I mean, it's not a mystery to me why his parents had the attitudes that they're expressing there, right? I can completely understand how that happened. But if we're going to ask about the action, it's like, how do you feel about, like, yes, I would in fact condemn the bombing of Dresden, right? I think that was awful. And by the way, it's really disturbing that Israeli apologists keep and Israeli government officials in some cases keep bringing that up as a precedent. It's like,
what about every other terrible thing that you've ever heard about happening? No one ever complained about that. Like, there's the talking point of like, no one like did anyone tell the United States after 9/11 not to do everything that they did? I mean, you've heard that, you've seen that talking point.
I have seen it, and it's like, yeah, no, thank God nobody told us not to start 20 years of bloody and pointless and awful wars. That would have been just terrible if that had been stopped somehow, if there had been like a ceasefire imposed in Afghanistan, and the last like 2 decades of just nightmarish outcomes from these American wars in the Middle East hadn't happened. But yeah, look, also, by the way, the bombing of Dresden has been widely recognized as a war crime in more recent decades by actual legal scholars, using that term in a very strict way, and also just by like normal people who've read Kurt Vonnegut, right? And it was actually incredibly controversial at the time, right? Like at the that it was, that there were actually plenty of real-time condemnations of that in allied countries. And yes, I would condemn it, right? I would also condemn what Hamas did on October 7th. I can understand what they did, in terms of killing and attacking civilians. I can understand why there are individuals, who it's not a mystery to me, why people who signed up, like, it's not a mystery to me why people join Hamas growing up in those circumstances at all, right? But that I agree with you. It's a separate question, right? Like I mean, there are lots of life experiences that might lead me to lots of places I don't think are objectively good, right? And I think you can understand that and have some, imaginative empathy for that, without endorsing it. And again, I do think that Norm's acknowledged here that some of what he initially said was wrong, and I think he's right to do that. But again, I just think the human contrast between Norm Finkelstein
fascinating
and Piers Morgan is kind of, well, I think it speaks for itself. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.